Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope. We are all the way to Chapter 2. In this book, we're going to get a little bit more acquainted with with one of the characters who's already been introduced and one character who's only been named. This is Chapter 2 called Lady MacLeod. I cannot say that the house in Queen Anne Street was a pleasant house. I am now speaking of the material house, made up of the walls and the furniture, not of any pleasantness or unpleasantness supplied by the inmates. It was a small house on the side of the street, squeezed in between two larger mansions which seemed to crush it, and by which its fair proportions of doorstep and area were in truth curtailed. The stairs were narrow. The dining room was dark, and possessed none of those appearances of plenteous hospitality which a dining room should have. But all this would have been as nothing if the drawing room had been as pretty as it is the bounden duty of all drawing rooms to be. Is your drawing room pretty? Does your house welcome someone who's walking in? But Alice Vavasor's drawing room was not pretty. Her father had had the care and furnishing of the house, and he had entrusted the duty to a tradesman who had chosen green paper, a green carpet, green curtains, and a green damask chairs. There was a green damask sofa also, and two green armchairs opposite to each other at the sides of the fireplace. The room was altogether green, and was not enticing. In shape it was nearly square, the very small room in the back, the same floor not having been, as is usual, added to it. This had been fitted up as a study for Mr. Vavasor, and was very rarely used for any purpose. So there's a living room, or a drawing room, and then there's a little room in the back that's never used. Probably has a chair and some bookcases. Most of us know when we enter a drawing room whether or not it is a pretty room or no. But how few of us know how to make a drawing room pretty? There has come up in London these latter days a form of room so monstrously ugly that I will venture to say that no other people on earth but Londoners would put up with it. Londoners, as a rule, take their houses as they can get them, looking only to situation, size, and price. What Grecian, what Roman, what Turk, what Italian would endure, or would ever have endured, to use a room with a monstrous cantle in the front in the form of a parallelogram cut sheerly out of one corner of it? This is the shape of a room we have now adopted, or rather the builders have adopted for us, in order to throw the whole first floor into one apartment, which may be presumed to have noble dimensions, with such drawback from it as necessitates the staircase may require. A sharp, unadorned corner projects itself into these would-be noble dimensions, and as ugly a form of chamber is produced as any upon which the eye can look. I would say more on the subject if I dared to do so here. But I am bound now to confine myself to Miss Vavasor's room. The monstrous deformity of which I have spoken was not known when that house in Queen Anne Street was built. There is to be found no such abomination in the shape of the buildings of our ancestors, not even in the days of George II. Oh, wait, Tony, you are saying more about it. But yet the drawing room of which I speak was ugly, and Alice knew that it was so. She knew that it was ugly, and she would greatly have liked to banish the green sofa, and to have repapered the wall, and to have hung up curtains with a dash of pink through them. With the green carpet she would have been contented, but her father was an extravagant man, and from that day on which she had come of age she had determined that it was her special duty to avoid extravagance. "It's the ugliest room I ever saw in my life," her father once said. "It's not very pretty," said Alice. "I'll go halves with you if on the expense of redoing it," said Mr. Vavasor. "Wouldn't that be extravagant, Papa? The things have not been here quite 4 years yet." "I don't quite see how Mr. Vavasor is extravagant." "He doesn't do anything except eat at his club. He makes £800 a year." "Presumably he owns the house. So he doesn't gamble. He doesn't travel. Anyway." Then Mr. Vavasor had shrugged his shoulders and had said nothing more about it. It was little to him whether the drawing room in Queen Anne Street was ugly or pretty. He was on the committee of his club, and he took care that the furniture there should be in all respects comfortable. It was now June, and that month Lady MacLeod was in the habit of spending among her noble relatives in London when she had succeeded in making both ends so far overlap each other at Cheltenham as to give her the £50 necessary for this purpose. That's Tony having a little fun on make ends meet. They're not just meeting, they're overlapping a little. They overlap. They make ends meet. Get it? For though she spent her months in London among her noble friends, it must not be supposed that her noble friends gave her bed and board. Those noble friends have gigantic piles in London, huge mansions, with rooms, a room they could stick Lady MacLeod. They still don't do it. They sometimes gave her tea, such as it was, and once or twice a month they gave her the old lady a second-rate dinner. On these occasions she hired a little parlour and bedroom behind it in King Street at St. James, and lived a hot, uncomfortable life, going about at nights to gatherings of fashionable people of which her heart disapproved, seeking for smiles which seldom came to her, and which she excused herself for desiring because they were the smiles of her kith and kin, telling herself always that she made this vain journey to the modern Babylon for the good of Alice Vavasor, and telling herself often that she now made it for the last time. And maybe now we see a hint of why she's never given more than a second-rate lunch or a little tea, because I doubt very much that she keeps her disapproval to herself. She might not say it, but I think it's probably pretty obvious that she doesn't like these people. She's, remember, a strict Sabbatarian Calvinist, so she doesn't like these people. I don't doubt that they can pick up on that just a bit. Although you have to wonder also if how strictly true this is. Trollope's narrator is saying that she has almost nothing to do with these people. They seem, as we're going to see in this chapter, pretty well versed on her and hers. On the occasion of her preceding visit, she had reminded herself that she was then 75 years old, and had sworn to herself that she would come to London no more. But here she was again in London, having justified the journey to herself on the plea that there were circumstances in Alice's engagement which made it desirable that she should for a while be near her niece. Her niece, as she thought, was hardly managing her own affairs discreetly. There's a reason for this. There's a trip being planned. That's what's got in Lady MacLeod's bonnet. "Well, Aunt," said Alice, as the old lady walked into the drawing room one morning at 11 o'clock. Alice always called Lady MacLeod her aunt, even though, as has been before explained, there was no such close connection between them. During Lady MacLeod's sojourn in London, these morning visits were made almost every day. Alice never denied herself, and even made a point of remaining at home to receive them, unless she had previously explained that she would be out. But I am not prepared to say that they were, of their own nature, agreeable to her. "Would you mind shutting the window, my dear?" said Lady MacLeod, seating herself stiffly on one of the small, ugly green chairs. She had been educated at a time when easy chairs were considered vicious, and among people who regarded all easy posture as being so, and she could still boast, at 76, that she never leaned back. "Would you mind shutting the window? I'm so warm that I'm afraid of the draught." Again, it's not just that she thinks easy chairs are evil. You can be sure she lets other people know she does. "You don't mean to say you've walked from King Street?" said Alice, doing as she was desired. "Indeed I do, every step of the way. Cabs are so ruinous. It's a most unfortunate thing. They always say it's just over 2 miles here. I don't believe a word of it, because I'm only a little more than half an hour walking, and those men will say anything. But how can I prove it, you know?" The cab drivers are overcharging her. "I really think it's too far for you to walk when it's so warm." "Oh, but what can I do, my dear? I must come when I've specially come up to London to see you. I shall have a cab back again, because it'll be hotter then, and my dear Lady Midlothian has promised to send her carriage at 3 to take me to a concert. I do wish you'd go, Alice." "It's out of the question, Aunt. The idea of my going in that way at the last moment, without any invitation." "It wouldn't be without invitation, Alice. The Marchioness has said to me over and over again how glad she would be to see you, if I would but bring you." "Why doesn't she come and call if she's so anxious to know me?" "My dear, you've no right to expect it. You haven't, indeed. She never calls even on me." "I know I've no right, and I don't expect it, and I don't want it. But neither has she a right to suppose that under such circumstances I shall go to her house. She might as well give it up, Aunt. Cart ropes wouldn't drag me there." "I think you are very wrong, particularly under your present circumstances. A young woman is going to be married, as you are." "I am. Perhaps." Booktube. Meet Alice Vavasor. I know we've met her before, but when Trollope asks you in the title of this book, "Can you forgive her?" he's not going to make it easy. Just so you know, that's all. "Oh, that's nonsense, Alice. Of course you are. And for his sake, you are bound to cultivate any advantage that naturally belongs to you. As to Lady Midlothian or the Marchioness coming to call on you here in your father's house after all that's passed, you really have no right to look for it. And I don't look for it. That sort of people are not expected to call at all. If you'll think of it, how could they do so with all the demands they have on their time? My dear aunt, I wouldn't interfere with their time for worlds. Nobody can say of me, I'm sure, that I run after great people or rich people. This Lady MacLeod says this. She's killing herself to come to London and hobnob with these people every summer. But she says, nobody can say of me, I'm sure, that I run after great people or rich people. It does happen that some of the nearest relations I have, indeed I may say the nearest relations, are people of high rank. And I do not see why I am bound to turn away from my own flesh and blood because of that, particularly when they are always so anxious to keep up the connection. I was only speaking for myself, aunt. It's very different for you. You've known them your whole life. And how are you to know them if you won't begin? Lady Midlothian said to me only yesterday that she was glad to hear that you were going to be married so respectably. And then... And Alice interrupts. Upon my word, I'm very obliged to her ladyship. I wonder whether she considered that she married respectably when she took Lord Midlothian. A little bit of a touchy subject. Now, Lady Midlothian had been unfortunate in her marriage, having united herself to a man of bad character who had used her ill, and from whom she was now for some years separated. Alice might have spared her allusion to this misfortune when speaking of the Countess to the cousin who was so fond of her, but she was angered by the application of that odious word respectable to her own prospects. And perhaps the more angered as she was somewhat inclined to feel that the epithet did suit her own position. Something in her spirit that doesn't quite like already being called respectable. Her engagement, as she sometimes told herself, was very respectable, and had as often told herself that it lacked other attractions which it should have possessed. A spark of romance, perhaps, of unpredictability. She was not quite pleased with herself in having accepted John Grey, or rather, perhaps, was not satisfied with herself in having loved him. In her many thoughts on the subject, she always admitted to herself that she had accepted him simply because she loved him, and that she had given quick assent to his quick proposal simply because he had won her heart. But she was sometimes almost angry with herself that she had permitted her heart to be thus easily taken from her, and had rebuked herself for her girlish facility. But the marriage would at any rate be respectable. Mr. Grey was a man of high character, of good though moderate means. He was, too, well educated, of good birth, a gentleman, and a man of talent. No one could deny that the marriage would be highly respectable, and her father had been more than satisfied. Why Miss Vavasor herself was not quite satisfied will, I hope, in time make itself clear. In the meantime, it can be understood that Lady Midlothian's praise would gall her. Why Miss Vavasor herself was not quite satisfied will, I hope, in time make itself appear. You be the judge of whether it ever actually does appear. You be the judge. Alice, don't be uncharitable, said Lady MacLeod severely. Whatever may have been Lady Midlothian's misfortunes, no one can say that they resulted from her own fault. Yes, they can, aunt, if she married a man whom she knew to be a scapegrace because he was very rich and an earl. She was the daughter of a nobleman herself, and only married in her own degree. But I don't want to discuss that. She meant to be good-natured when she mentioned your marriage, and you should take it as it was meant. After all, she was only your mother's second cousin. Dear aunt, I make no claim on her cousinship. But she admits the claim, and is quite anxious that you should know her. She had been in trouble to find out everything about Mr. Grey, and told me nothing could be more satisfactory. Upon my word, I am much obliged to her. Lady MacLeod was a woman of much patience, and possessed also a considerable perseverance. For another half-hour she went on expatiating on the advantages that would accrue to Alice as a married woman from the acquaintance with her noble relatives, and of endeavouring to persuade her that no better opportunity than the present would present itself. There would be a place in Lady Midlothian's carriage, as none other of the daughters were going but Lady Jane. Lady Midlothian would take it as quite a compliment, and a concert was not at all like a ball or a customary party. An unmarried girl might very properly go to a concert under such circumstances as now existed without any special invitation. Lady MacLeod ought to have known her adopted niece better. Alice was immovable. As a matter of course, she was immovable. Lady MacLeod had seldom been able to persuade her of anything, and ought to have been well sure of all things that she could not persuade her to this. Then at last they came to another subject, as to which Lady MacLeod declared that she had specially come on this special morning, forgetting, probably, that she had already made the same assertion with reference to the concert. But in truth, the last assertion was the correct one, for on that other subject she had been hurried to say more than she meant by the eagerness of the moment. All the morning she had been full of the matter on which she was now to speak. She had discussed it quite at length with Lady Midlothian. So she does have long conversations with at least one of these noble relatives. They don't quite ignore her. Though she was by no means prepared to tell Alice Vavasor that any such discussion had taken place. From the concert, and the effect on Lady Midlothian's countenance might have from the concert, and the effect which Lady Midlothian's countenance might have had upon Mr. Grey's future welfare, she also got herself by degrees round to the projected Swiss tour, which Alice was about to make. Alice was about to take a vacation. Of this Swiss tour she had heard before, but had not heard who were to be Miss Vavasor's companions till Lady Midlothian had told her. Lady Midlothian gets the gossip. How it had come to pass that Lady Midlothian had interested her so much in the concerns of a person whom she did not know, and on whom she in her greatness could not be expected to call, I cannot say. But from some quarter she had learned who were the proposed companions of Alice Vavasor's tour, and she had told Lady MacLeod that she did not at all approve of the arrangement. "And when do you go, Alice?" said Lady MacLeod. "Early in July, I believe. It will be very hot, but Kate must be back by the middle of August." Kate Vavasor was Alice's first cousin. "Oh, Kate is to go with you." "Of course she is. I would not go alone, or with no one but George. Indeed, it was Kate who made up the party." "Of course you could not go alone with George," said Lady MacLeod, very grimly. Now, George Vavasor was Kate's brother, and was therefore also a first cousin to Alice. He was heir to the old squire down in West Warland, with whom Kate lived, and their father being dead. Nothing, it would seem, could be more rational than that Alice should go to Switzerland with her cousins. But Lady MacLeod was clearly not of this opinion. She looked very grim as she made this allusion to cousin George, and seemed to be preparing herself for a fight. And here, in 2025, you're going to be hearing this and thinking, what on earth could be wrong with this? You don't want two women traveling alone. If you can avoid it, you want a man along with them. Why not? Kate's is Alice's first cousin, so is George. And what you have to remember, if you're hearing this in the 21st century, is that in Victorian era, first cousins married. First cousins got married and had children. So George isn't viewed as innocent. He isn't viewed as an innocent relation. "That is exactly what I say," answered Alice, "but indeed he is simply going as an escort for me and Kate, as we don't want the role of unprotected females. It is very good-natured of him, seeing how much his time is taken up." "I thought he never did anything." "That's because you don't know him, Aunt." "No, certainly I don't know him." She did not add that she had no wish to know Mr. George Vavasor, but she looked at it. "And has your father been told he is going?" "Of course he has." "And does—" Lady MacLeod hesitated a little before she went on, and then finished her question with a little spasmodic assumption of courage. "And does Mr. Grey know that he's going?" Alice remained silent for a full minute before she answered this question, during which Lady MacLeod sat watching her grimly, with her eyes very intent upon her niece's face. If she supposed such silence to have been in any degree produced by shame in answering the question, she was much mistaken. But it may be doubted whether she understood the character of the girl whom she thought she knew so well, and it is probable that she did make such a mistake. "I might tell you simply that he does," said Alice at last, "seeing that I wrote him yesterday, letting him know that such were our arrangements, but I feel that I should not thus answer the question you mean to ask. You want to know whether Mr. Grey will approve of it. As I only wrote yesterday, of course I have not heard, and therefore cannot say. But I can say this, Aunt, that much as I might regret his disapproval, it would make no change in my plans." "Would it not? Then I must tell you that you are very wrong. It ought to make a change. What, the disapproval of the man you are going to marry make no change in your plans?" "Not in that matter, no. Come, Aunt, if we must discuss this matter, let us do it at any rate fairly. It is in the ordinary way. If Mr. Grey had asked me to give up for any reason my trip altogether, I should have given it up certainly, as I would give up any other indifferent project as a request of so dear a friend. A friend with whom I am so closely connected. But if he asked me not to travel with my cousin George, I should refuse him absolutely, without a word of parley on the subject, simply because of the nature and closeness of my connection with him. I suppose you understand what I mean, Aunt?" "I suppose you do. I suppose I do. You mean that you would refuse to obey him on the very subject on which he has a right to claim your obedience." "He has no right to claim my obedience on any subject." And said Alice, and as she spoke, Aunt MacLeod jumped up with a little start in the vehemence of the words, and of the tone in which they were expressed. She had heard that tone before, and might have been used to it, but nevertheless the little jump was involuntary. At present he has no right to my obedience on any subject, least of all that, said Alice. His advice he may give me, but I am quite sure he will not ask for obedience. And if he advises you, you will slight his advice. If he tells me that I had better not travel with my cousin George, I shall certainly not take his advice. Moreover, I should be careful to let him know how much I was offended by any such counsel from him. It would show a littleness on his part, and a suspicion of which I cannot suppose him to be capable. Alice, as soon as she said this, got up from her seat and walked about the room. When she had finished, she stood at one of the windows with her back to her visitor. There was a silence between them for a minute or two, during which Lady MacLeod was deeply considering how best she might speak the terrible words which, as Alice's nearest female relative, she felt herself bound to utter. At last she collected her thoughts and her courage and spoke out. My dear Alice, I need hardly say that if you had a mother living, or any person with you filling the place of a mother, I should not interfere in this matter. Of course, Aunt MacLeod, if you think I am wrong, you have quite a right to say so. I do think you are wrong, very wrong indeed, and if you persist in this, I am afraid I must say that I shall think you are wicked. Of course, Mr. Grey cannot like you to travel with George Vavasor. And why not, Aunt? Alice, as she asked this question, turned round and confronted Lady MacLeod boldly. She spoke with a steady voice and fixed her eyes on the old lady's face as though determined to show that she had no fear of what might be said to her. Why not, Alice? Surely you do not wish me to say why not? But I do wish you to say why not. How can I defend myself till the accusation is made? Again, your instincts in 2025 are going to say, what on earth is the big deal? But in 1865, it was routine for first cousins to marry. That's the thing. It's a weird thing here. Of course, George is also objectionable in his own right, but we'll get to him. Don't you worry. We'll get to him. Had what? You are now engaged to marry Mr. Grey with the consent and approbation of all your friends. 2 years ago, you had what, Aunt? If you mean to say that 2 years ago I was engaged to my cousin George, you are mistaken. 3 years ago I would have told you that under certain circumstances I would become engaged to him, but my conditions did not suit him, nor his me, and no engagement was ever made. Mr. Grey knows the history of the whole thing. As far as it was possible, I've told him everything that took place. And now, very neatly, in the course of conversation, Trollope has told us. This is the opposite of an info dump. The fact was, Alice, that George Vavasor's mode of life was such that an engagement with him would have been absolute madness. Dear Aunt, you must excuse me if I say that I cannot discuss George Vavasor's mode of life. If I were thinking of becoming his wife, you would have a perfect right to discuss it, because of your constant kindness to me. But as matters are, he's simply a cousin, and as I like him and you do not, we had better say nothing more about him. I must say this, after what has passed at the present crisis of your life. Dear Aunt, I'm not in any crisis. Yes, you are, Alice, in the most special crisis of a girl's life. You are still a girl, but you are promised wife of a very worthy man who will look to you for all his domestic happiness. George Vavasor has the name, at least, of being very wild. The worthy man and the wild man will have to fight it out between them. If I'm going away with George by himself, there might be something in what you say. But she's not. She's going with Kate. That would be monstrous. Monstrous or not, it isn't what I'm about to do. Kate and I have put our purses together and are going to have an outing for our own special fun and gratification. As we should be poor travelers alone, George has promised to go with his sister. Papa knows all about it and never thought of making any objection. Lady MacLeod shook her head. She did not like to say anything against Mr. Vavasor before his daughter, but the shaking of her head was intended to signify that Mr. Vavasor's assent in such a matter was worth nothing. I can only say again, said Lady MacLeod, that I think Mr. Grey will be displeased, and that he will have a very great cause for displeasure. And I think, moreover, that his approbation ought to be your chief study. I believe, my dear, I'll ask you to let Jane go and get me a cab. I shan't have a bit too much time to dress before the concert. She's done. She says as much as she's going to say. Alice simply rang the bell and said no further word on the subject which they had been discussing. When Lady MacLeod had got up to go away, Alice kissed her, as was customary with them, and the old lady, as she went, uttered her customary valediction. God bless you, my dear. Goodbye. I'll come tomorrow if I can. There was therefore no quarrel between them, but both of them felt that words had been spoken which probably led to some diminution of their past intimacy. More words are coming. When Lady MacLeod had gone, Alice sat alone for an hour thinking of what had passed between them, thinking rather of those two men, the worthy man and the wild man, whose names had been mentioned in close connection with herself. John Grey was a worthy man, a man worthy at all points, as she told herself, uh, as far as she knew him. She told herself that it was so, and she told herself also that her cousin George was wild, very wild. Yet her thoughts were, I fear, on the whole, more kindly toward her cousin than toward her lover. She had declared to her aunt that John Grey would be incapable of such suspicion as would be shown by any objection on his part to the arrangements made for the tour. She had said so, and had so believed, and yet she continued to brood over the position which her affairs would take if he did make objection, like the ones Lady MacLeod anticipated. She told herself over and over again that under such circumstances she would not give way an inch. He is free to go, she said to herself. If he does not trust me, he is quite free to go. It may almost be said that she came at last to anticipate from her lover that very answer to her own letter which she had declared him incapable of making. The more she thinks about it, the more she thinks he's going to write her back a letter saying, you've described your travel plans. You're going to the continent with your cousin, Kate, but you're also going with your cousin George, and I don't like that part. And I'm wondering if you and Kate would be willing to go alone, or forestall the trip completely. Her aunt is sure that John Grey is going to write back and say that. And the more she thinks about it, the more Alice Vavasor thinks, well, maybe he will do that. Doesn't seem like him, but maybe he will. So I want to point out two things. One is how quickly and adroitly we are naturally moved into the complications of this world, of these people. Think how much we know after only 2 chapters. That's one thing that I want to point out, how expertly that is done. Trollope, of course, is not a new novelist at this time. He's writing at what a hackneyed critic would say is the height of his powers. And thing number 2 that I want to point out here is how much different, let's just say different, because it's Victober, and we don't want to slight the Prince of Victober, how much different these 2 chapters would be if Dickens had written them. I just want to mention those 2 things. But anyway, that is chapter 2. We're going to move on next time, so I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.